who has a nose like Brother Bob, but eyes like Mother Jane. But there's nothing that all members of the family have in common. This is where prototype theory comes from. Eleanor Ross's prototype theory.
I didn't know it came from that. That's interesting.
Yeah, those are typical examples by reference to which we normally start to learn the use of a word, not by definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I think at Wittgenstein's point is there just a lot of things that don't have definitions.
Mm-hmm.
Although now people misunderstand this, as you point out. I had a chairman 50 years ago, I guess now, who a philosopher, charming and very intelligent man, who thought Wittgenstein was arguing that there was something all things by a name had in common, which is precisely what he was contesting.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Otherwise, I find it to be a very useful idea. It's much preferable to Plato's archetype theory of words.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Wittgenstein was not too clear in his philosophical investigations either. So I think we could blame him a little bit for being misunderstood. Perhaps, I don't know. But he was not. He was. His style was, I think, famously cryptic and.
Cryptic is the right word.
Yes.
His writing was pretty cryptic.
Yes. So he's bound to be misunderstood, I think. I have many colleagues here in Mexico who literally worship Wittgenstein. And I like to say that they are more Wittgensteinians than Wittgenstein himself.
Well, Marx once said, the one thing I'm not is a Marxist.
Yeah, right. And they worship, and that's bad, of course. You're not supposed to do that with anyone. You are not supposed to worship anyone. Perhaps except your wife and your daughter, and that's
Wittgenstein excused his cryptic style once by saying, well, he didn't want to prevent people from thinking about these things for themselves. Over-explain it.
Right.
I'll use that myself when.
So the beetle in the box argument is Wittgenstein's is a thought experiment that Wittgenstein discusses in this book in his philosophical investigations, and it's typically interpreted as an argument against the notion of private language. And the experiment is that imagine that a group of people each one has a box with something inside it, and here comes the internal part of our topic, with something inside it, and we all call it a beetle, but there's no way to know exactly what that is, because no one can look inside anyone else's box. So from here, Wittgenstein argues that the notion of private language is meaningless, is nonsense. That's pretty much it.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. So that's the internality part.
It gets back to the topic of our talk today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, there's one thing, and this, if we're talking about observability today, weren't we? Yeah,
right, exactly. It connects to that too, yes.
The point to be made there, I think, against Wittgenstein is that there are other ways of knowing what's inside the box and being able to look into it and see it.
Exactly. That's one criticism, and the other criticism is that how did everyone agree to call a beetle that thing? How did everyone agree on calling the thing that they have inside a beetle? So that's another problem. But I think that his focus was on ordinary language, and I think that the experiment applies better there, in common ordinary psychological language than in science. I agree that you can scientifically you can look inside. There are ways to look and observe more directly inside the box, but that would be science, and that would be scientific knowledge, I guess, neuroscientific knowledge, cognitive neuroscience, and all that. But I think to play devil's advocate here, I think Wittgenstein was his analogy. The proper context of it is common, ordinary language, psychological language, and common sense, and folk psychology, actually. So so I think the analogy it plays better in that context. So.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the two parts. We have the internality part, which I think is rather straightforward. I mean, there is nothing mysterious about it, other than perhaps the arbitrariness of the limit, or the limit. I apologize for my pausing, but it's been a while since I practiced my conversational English.
The enemy is folk psychology.
Folk psychology. That's right. That's
it's not the idea of the internal. I take it.
Right.
I used to be enormously puzzled. I'm still puzzled, but I think I began to see. I thought talk of radical empiricism, talking about private events, was paradoxical.
Yes. Yep.
Well, the whole point of behaviorism was to get away from inaccessible private events.
Yes. Well, Skinnerians commit that sin, I think, of being incoherent by talking about. Well, I'm not even sure what private events are from a Skinnerian point of view. Sometimes it looks like private is the same as internal, but others insist that it is not. And I'm not sure which is the correct one, or even if they are different. If the private is not the same as the internal, what is the difference? I'm not that part of Skinnerian radical behavioristic psychology has always mystified me, to put it mildly.
I think that's because there's no text for it. There's the hour with Wittgenstein, Skinner, who was not so much cryptic as equivocal about how he spoke.
Right.
So you could read different takes on things in different papers, and people spun it from there. People like Watson were relatively clear. Skinner wanted to have it both ways. He wanted to be an operationalist, and he wanted also to be able to talk about the inner story.
Right. Yeah. Skinner. I think Skinner was. I respect him. Of course, he was extremely influential in my work. And at the beginning, I used to be Skinnerian, but then I saw the light, as it were. But I even met him personally. I went to 3 months before he died. I went to his house and knocked at the door, and I said, "Hey, I want to meet you." And he was extremely gracious, and he gave me an hour of his time.
I did the same thing as you.
Oh.
Did he have a latex glove on?
I don't remember. It was so long ago. Probably he was. He did.
What he died of, decades earlier, he had some cancer that he got radiation for and cured. But they said inevitably radiation treatment might get back to you, and it did. In his old age, he became immunocompromised.
Yes.
The immune system went to hell.
Probably he did. I don't remember. It was so long ago, and I was so, so overwhelmed
Oh yeah.
by the whole experience that I couldn't. I'm sure I only saw his face and his famous Mona Lisa smile.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like meeting a rock star personally.
Yeah.
It was a defining experience. But I already was not. I had abandoned Skinnerianism already when I met him. But still he was an important figure. But going back to what I wanted to say, he was too political for my taste. I mean, he as you said, Peter, he tried to have and eat the cake.
Yes.
And that is not a good thing if you want to build a cogent, compelling philosophical system.
That's
which
right.
is what he tried to do with radical behaviorism.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, the notion of a private event is very unclear to me. If private is not the same as internal, then what is the difference?
Yeah.
And again, to be fair, some have argued that private means it could be internal, but it doesn't necessarily be have to be internal.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy is something that occurs when you're alone, for example.
Yeah, you can't see what I'm looking at here outside in my patio.
Right, and or something that only you can experience. I don't know, but that there might be something there, but I'm still not sure.
Whenever I hear the phrase private events, I think of the Monty Python bit piece. I don't know if it was a movie, and it was entitled "Privates on Parade."
Yes, I think it was one of their flying circus.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was.
Perhaps I think. I don't remember, but
so
maybe.
What our topic is either internal causation or it's what's our topic today?
Internal causation. That was, but it
yeah
radiates all over the place, right?
I've always liked Mackey's take on what a cause is, and I thought you put it to brilliant use in your paper on the command neuron, because it was exactly what was needed there.
Yeah.
And I really encourage you to blow the dust off it, fix up what the reviewer said, and send it out. There must be a philosophy of neuroscience journal, and that's where it should go.
I'm not sure that there is. There should be, but I haven't found one. I've searched for one, and I still haven't found a journal dedicated entirely to philosophy of neuroscience.
Is brain and behavioral science still going?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Going strong. It probably would take a more substantial and substantive argument and paper than this is to get in there as the main paper.
Right. Yeah.
Let me. May I take a jab at this? At your paper?
Yes, please. Again, bear in mind that it is a very rough draft. I mean, it's very preliminary, and it still needs a lot of work. But thank you for your commentaries. That they are very, very, very useful.
Well, this is one attempt at a substantive commentary.
Yes. Yes.
Those are all stylistic remarks that I made. What it struck me is your account of the experiments that you describe, discuss, certainly show that events in the brain do cause certain kinds of behaviors, and right?
Yes.
Okay. So certainly in the case of fish, and one suspects in other animals too.
Yes.
But now, okay, so then the question gets to be the nature of these events. I mean, we're talking efficient causes, right?
Probably.
Events, huh?
Yeah. Perhaps. Yes. Maybe.
Well, I
That's one
assume
of the
we
problems.
were. If it and I think these are that events in the brain can be efficient causes of behaviors, certain specified behaviors in certain animals at least. That's demonstrated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if these events, however, what you're ultimately interested in, I take it, are mental events that are internal in I include mental states there, supposedly,
Yes.
that are internal in a quite different sense. They're not, as we normally conceive them, beliefs and so on are not describable and definable in physicalist terms, as are neural events. They are the language of the mental is intentional, to use that term, and that of neurophysiology is extensional. And that's the question is now, of course, that's where you get the problem of whether it makes sense even to identify states of mind or thoughts or emotions or whatever mental events with the states of the brain. Because if you do, it suddenly becomes very unclear how descriptions of the one can provide explanations of the other. That's the so-called hard problem of consciousness. In the remark.
Yeah, well, it's a good remark. It goes to the heart of the issue that I think that Jose in that nice paper demonstrated a sensible way to talk about command neurons. They are identified and justified in the physiological sense. I don't think there's too much question about that. But your point, Max, is very well taken. When we're talking about these different kinds of entities, we can also demonstrate a kind of causality. I ask you what 2 + 4 is, and you do some quick mental arithmetic and come up with the answer 7. Or whatever answer you come up with.
I'll have to get my calculator.
Thinking about that, I got you. I caused you to think about. Oops, no, he misadded. But what you did in your head, your mental arithmetic, caused you to. I mean, certainly I was the originating cause, but the mental arithmetic was a linking cause that made you come up with the answer 6, 7, 6. How do we? Why can't we? I understand it's a different beast, but why can't we talk about those mental operations as causal links, at least, if not causes?
Go ahead, Max.
Well, we do, of course, in workaday language. That's folk psychology. I take it. And contemporary folk psychology is finds very congenial the idea. I don't know, people, instead of talking about their minds, will talk about their brains, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the logical problem is there. If you're limited for a science of neurophysiology to the use of extensional language, then you can't use intentional language. And if you start using mental language, you're doing so. I think, what's his name? I forgot, was right about that. That's the definition of the mental. Jose.
Yes, Brentano. Franz
yes.
Brentano. Yes.
But okay, so I understand this is a stricture, Brentano stricture, we can call it. And I, being not a philosopher, want to ask why. Why wasn't your mental arithmetic a cause of the answer that you came up with?
Well, because before we can say that it's a cause, it has to be identified. described in language that satisfies certain the conditions we require for identity of that, right? And when then that's the behavioral problem. When I ascribe to you a thought, a belief, or so on, it is by virtue of your behavior, if I define. So behaviorists, I want to define thoughts and so on in behavioral terms. Those are not neurophysiological terms.
Right.
So what you're saying, Max, is that in order to speak of internal mental causation, you need to identify some what Quine would call an identity criterion for the mental. And that cannot be done if the mental is, well, that can only be done if the mental is identified with the brain, with the neural, and that cannot be done.
Or with behavior.
Or with behavior.
Behaviorism is an attempt
to
get around the problem by identifying the mental with behavior.
Yes.
To believe that 2 + 2 is 4 is to have a disposition to agree that 2 + 2 is 4, for example.
Right. So why don't you? There's a piece of technical terminology here that I will ask you, Max, to explain for us. Is the extensional versus intentional? I assume you're talking about intentional with a T, or with intentional with an, or of intentional with an S. With an S.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a technical bit that I think it would be very helpful if you, Max, clarify for us. I think I have it clear, but I need a professional philosopher.
Well, I like Quine's treatment of it. He talks about referential opacity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What exactly are you talking about if you talk about Jones's thought that 2 + 2 is 4? You're referring to a thought, but can't say exactly what it is, right? Or can't give a description of it that specifies its identity condition so that we know whether Jones's thought that 2 + 2 = 4, what relation it has to Smith's thought that 2 + 2 = 4. And the mark of that, the indication of that, are two logical indications of that. That is failures of existential generalization. Jones is thinking of a horse. There is a horse does not entail there is a horse Jones is thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn does not entail Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn, but in fact he did. That's the other failure of logic. It's a failure of substitution of identities, Leibniz's criterion of identity.
Right.
Those two problems have to be overcome. Otherwise, you have not. This is a problem of the logic of discourse. I think that's what Skinner took retreat in, and I take it that's what behaviorists do. I myself am resisting being so narrow about it. I don't see how we can get along without folk psychology.
Right.
That's Dennett's position.
Right. And the Churchlands too have proposed the famous eliminativist materialism, or materialistic eliminativism, which is against folk psychology.
Well, it's a name that doesn't solve the problem.
Right. Exactly. Yes. I agree.
It says there is no problem, folks. But thoughts are just events. This is Hobbes. Yeah. Thoughts are just motions in the brain.
Right.
Once we know the motions in the brain, we'll have descriptions of them in extensional physical terms. Hobbes is thinking, and there's no problem. We can then presumably give up on the intentional language that is built. that is essential to folk psychology.
Yes.
How does
The heart
this,
of it.
how does this referential opacity and the requirement of what was your term that it be about something, Jose? How does that square with what we know about deep learning in machines with scores of layers? And they know more or less what the layers can do. And we know that they're extremely good at understanding human speech and responding to it. But no engineer can tell you what's going on in these deep learning nets because they train themselves and the connections are weird, and they could, like looking into the brain, look at particular connections. But what they say, the piece of silicon is computing your name, your location, what kind of coffee you like to drink. And they talk about all these other things it's doing, which it is doing, but they'll never understand the schematic for it. Is that not exactly analogous, or does it fail to be analogous?
Well, this is a kind of a point Hillary Putnam, Jose knows about him, made talking about computers. You got two computers. One's an Apple and one's
cheese.
What? DOS machine. Huh?
Right.
They've got different operating systems and so on, and they can both compute 2 + 2 is 4, but presumably the electrical mechanisms have different descriptions.
Yeah.
We say
although Putnam himself, he ended up, rejecting his own, famously rejecting his own proposal.
Well, that was the original idea.
That was of functionalism. His function. Yes.
And this is the kind of thing that Donald Davidson bought into, I think, at the time there, so-called anomalous monism.
Which is a very, very difficult piece of argument to understand.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. It's not opaque. It's not obscure. It's not equivocal. It's just very hard to understand. So maybe we should leave it for another time.
Yeah,
but,
if you find it hard to understand,
yes.
beyond me.
It is really hard. I don't know if Max agrees with me. It's the argument itself is wow, really, really technical, and I've had I think I've managed to have a correct understanding of it, but it took some time and some effort.
Well, Putnam's language was multiple realizability.
Yes, that part I
terms.
understand. Yes, I was referring to Davidson's anomalous monism argument.
But I've been quoting Putnam, but by the way, I beat Putnam to press with this idea.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Never been noticed, but
right. But going back to the extensional intentional with an S distinction, I think that I don't know, Peter, is that clear to you? The two
it took me a while to get the distinction, because they do similar work, but one is much, one involves all the referential opacity and failure of generalization. But it comes close to the notion that all rational behavior is about something. It's in some ways goal directed. Otherwise, it's not working its way. It's just spinning the gears. And so the two get confounded in my head oftentimes, but I do understand the difference.
Right. And how about the difference between intentionality with a T and intentionality with an S? That's the other very technical, difficult part.
The T is intentional, of course. One has intentions. That's
right.
One behaves intentionally to achieve an end. I mean, that involves, of course, an explicit reference to final causes, or an implicit reference to final causes. Whereas intentionality with an S does not. That's only one thing it covers more than intentionality with a T.
Yeah,
Right.
Makes sense? Yeah.
it makes good
Yes.
sense. Hmm.
But would you agree, Max, that some philosophers, identify one with the tend to identify almost one with the other, intentionality with a T and intentionality with an S?
Uh,
Because if I remember correctly, Searle pointed out in one of his works, John Searle, I
yeah.
think it was in his intentionality book, in his 1983 intentionality book, he pointed out that that one of the most widespread confusions in contemporary philosophy, something like that, is the false belief that there is an even close connection, perhaps even an identity between S and T. Let's put it that way. But would you agree with Searle's assessment there, that it is a common confusion? Because what you said, if I understood you correctly, Max, you do not identify one with the other. They are different, but they are still very, very closely connected. And I'm not sure how valid is Searle's assessment that
Well, I don't remember Searle on this point, although I think I read it when I was preparing my talk on Searle for your conference back in 1995.
Wow. Yes.
My suggestion just then, which I've not developed anywhere, is that intentionality with a T is a subcase of intentionality.
Mm-hmm. With an S. Okay.
With an S.
So you believe that there is a very close connection, a deep, close connection between the two.
Yeah, well, in the sense that, I mean, intentionality with a T is mental, right? One intends to do things. It doesn't have to be conscious, I don't think. I think beasts behave with intentions, right? Behave intentionally. The fox chases the rabbit with an intention to get him and eat him.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but that's only a special case. There are other kinds of here believing that desiring a horse is intentional and with S, but not with a T yet.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Believing that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn is intentional with an S. The believing is there's no intentions in that.
Yeah.
Not explicit ones, certainly.
Right. Yeah. In relation to what you're saying now, of having an intention, of identifying intentionality with having an intention, is that what you're saying? That having an intention is the same as intentionality? No, you're not saying that. You're saying that having
intentionality by intentionality with a T.
Yes, right.
Which is, I'm not sure that's a noun with which I'm not terribly familiar, but I took it you mean having an intention or acting with
well, what I understand, and I might be wrong, of course, as usual, but what I understand, the meaning of that term in the philosophy of mind, which Brentano initiated, is to refer to mental states that have content or that are about something. And of course, having an intention is part of, is intentional in that sense, but it is not the only type of
well, it's
mental
an intention
state.
with an S.
No, well, my understanding is an intention with a T.
Well,
that's my understanding.
Maybe it got spelled that way. I take him to mean, suppose you think of a horse.
Right.
Well, the intention of your thought, the object of your thought, is an intention with S.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Right?
I'll have to go back to it and
yeah, and it is an intentional. Because you think of a horse, you can do that, but you don't. There doesn't have to be a horse that you think of.
Right, exactly. Although
right?
it could be.
You can't ride a horse without there being a horse that you ride.
Right.
But you can think of a horse, imagine a horse, dream a horse, describe a horse that doesn't exist.
Right.
That's intentionality. I take it in
With an S.
Yeah, you might say that it's, in Brentano's way of thinking, I think all he's getting at is your mental act is aimed at an
Right.
object. But this
it's about the aboutness thing.
And it's aimed at something but
right.
That's a misleading metaphor here, I think.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. The point is that the sentence that you think of an X, or the sentence is got an object. The term object is grammatical here, and it's rooted in my view. And Descartes' talk about objects. He said mental objects have objective or mental reality, but no physical reality necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Another way of stating in Brentano's point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, my understanding is different, but again, I could be wrong. And the T versus S thing messes things up really, really badly here.
That's why I prefer referential opacity.
Referential opacity. That's
what you're about. And Searle does that too. Searle just says intentionality is aboutness. Invents a new word, and that's a reference, I think.
Right, or directedness is also a term that's usually.
Well, directedness has physical implications that might carry you towards thinking that, right? It had to involve some sort of intent to do something. Right.
I think that the term intentional comes from the Latin intendere, which means pointing out, pointing towards. And I think that the medieval reference there is the archer with aiming with his or her arrow and bow, aiming at some target. So that's the etymology of it. I think it's revealing, but
all right, let's buy that.
I was talking about just the etymology.
Let's buy that. Yeah. You can aim at the target without having the intention to shoot it.
Right. Yes, that's right.
And that's where the failure of existential implication comes in. You see.
Yes.
Right. You have to You have to intend and to shoot it. So it's not just aiming.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this question. I don't know what Jose would say. I agree with you that we can't live without folk psychology. I mean, we can't communicate with others without indulging in the venial, if not mortal, sin of folk psychology. But folk psychology is a very, what do you call it? It's a word that does not, you don't want to have that word labeling your way of thinking or talking. It's pejorative is the word I was looking for. It's a pejorative phrase, folk psychology.
Only to some. There are many defenders of folk psychology out there.
I mentioned Dennett being one.
No, I'm not so sure. I don't know.
I've known some who were. George Graham was. A very enthusiastic defender of folk psychology, and there are others.
If it's essential, my question is, and I think it probably is essential to coherent communication with others, why can't it be cleaned up and have a suit put on it and made acceptable? Is it the
that's what I take it behaviorist and physicalist, and pure radical empiricist are trying to do.
Yeah.
The question, of course, is can they expect to succeed? I take it Skinner thought that the only way to succeed was just to abandon the language of folk psychology altogether.
Yeah.
You don't talk about beliefs. You don't talk about thoughts. We don't deny that these private events exist.
Mm-hmm.
But we just choose to talk about other things. So we limit ourselves enormously.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, it seems to me, is essentially you give up psychology.
Yeah, and you give up things we know are important.
We don't. And I'm a very practical-minded guy. You know, I grew up with carpenters. My dad was a carpenter, and my relatives are all carpenters, and I was a half-ass carpenter myself at one time. And you don't throw away a tool that's still useful.
Right.
That's
right.
Dinnett's point.
Right. Yeah. Very instrumentalistic.
Yeah. I wrote a paper very early as a kid philosopher called The Illogic of the Mental.
Mm-hmm.
And I meant the illogic of mental language.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem to get around.
Yeah.
If we because if it's, well, you're faced with the question whether you want to do science. Mm-hmm. Science is by definition extensionalist, to use this language. The mental is by definition intentionalist.
Yeah.
Okay. So that follows that you end up with something like Donald Davidson's point, which is there can't be any science of psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. But going back to the internal causation part, I think, as I said before, I take the internality to be relatively straightforward, and as I have, as we have, Peter and I have discussed many times, I take internality to be a physical relation, and if one believes that mental events or mental states or mental processes, which is another huge problem there, is there any difference between these three things, events, states, and processes? And I know of a whole book dedicated to that, to a discussion of that distinction. But if one believes that, I'm convinced, I might be wrong, and I think I might be convinced of otherwise, but I'm convinced that internality is a physical relation. Something that is internal is necessarily physical. There's no way around it. And
well, in its literal use of the word, that's certainly the case.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's the use I'm focusing on, because metaphorical uses they are not useful to me. From an instrumentalistic point of view, I have more use for literal meanings than for metaphorical meanings. I mean, metaphorical meaning can be anything. I don't know. I don't understand them. When you say, for example, that I am in love, that in there is, well, it's not inside.
That's not metaphorical.
It's not. Well, that's a different sense of in.
That's idiomatic.
Idiomatic. That's right. Idiomatic. That's right. Or when you say I'm in good health.
Untranslatable use of the prepositions. Prepositions. Right. I think when people foreign languages have trouble with prepositions above all things.
Right.
Never get them right.
Oh yes, absolutely. Prepositions are the hardest. Prepositions to me are have been the hardest part to master from both languages that I.
They're all idiomatic and governed by tacit conventions that.
Yes, right. But what is the difference, Max and Peter? I would ask you, what's the difference between saying I am in love and versus I am in pain, or I'm having a thought in my head? Those are seem to me two very different uses of the preposition in.
Yours, Peter.
In my head versus in love or in good health.
Well, in love and good health are both referring to an implicit state of the body. Your heart is fluttering for good reasons in one case and bad reasons in the other. In my head, it's obviously redundant. That's where thoughts usually are had. And it's an assertion that the images that go with the thought are somehow projecting inside your head or the head. And so it's I don't think there's a huge difference between them because they all refers to states.
Yeah, I usually just, I hurt. Not I'm in pain, but I hurt.
Yeah.
You say I'm in pain, you invite the question what of the relation between me and my pain. Well, then it's I hurt is better.
Right.
It's a condition of me. That's what it is. The pain is not an object.
Yeah.
It's not a thing. That's right.
I feel pain. Same problem there. I feel pain.
But I think that when philosophers of mind and psychologists speak in the way that say some things like what Peter said in his addition example, 2 + 4 in your head, that you do something in your head. I think that is the dominant meaning of being inside something.
Well, look, there are ways to re-express that don't have those those implications of internal events at all. It's essentially by denying that there's anything external that answers to my thoughts. You see.
When you do it externally with pencil and paper, you're still doing it in your head. It's just so I think when you say you're doing it in your head, you mean you're not using pencil and paper. And
I'm happy with doing that sort of stuff for the time being. But there, as I say, because that's the tool we now have.
Yeah.
This is Dennett's message, as I think above all. So
yes.
Right. It isn't that there's no logical identity to be laid out, but functionally speaking, your brain does stuff, and that results in stuff. That seems hardly disputable. Put that way, that claim.
Right. Yes. Now. Well, I agree that there are ways to interpret in the preposition in ways that do not necessarily imply internality. But two things. First, they seem to me very convoluted ways. And second, I think they do not. They only imply that the preposition in has a unique meaning, which I don't think. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that in means only internal to or inside of something. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there is that the dominant meaning of the preposition in the philosophy of mind refers to internality or inner. That's all I'm saying. That doesn't exclude the possibility of giving alternative interpretations of in. By the way, I wanted to mention to you, if you have Netflix, I highly recommend the stand-up, the most recent stand-up comedian Hannah Gadsby, or Gatsby, I think it's Gatsby. What she says about how she remembers how she was taught in school about prepositions, and it is hilarious. I highly recommend it.
All right.
She's in the autism spectrum, but she's hilarious. I mean, she's an Australian comedian.
Okay.
And I highly recommend her most recent Hannah Gatsby, yes, Hannah with double N and an H. It ends with an H. And
well, before we go, I wanted to ask Peter a personal question.
I'm here. I'm listening to you.
Are you there? I happen to see your gutters up above you there. Have you fixed your gutters yet?
No, I did check out the link you sent me to Lowe's, and the next time I need to expose myself to the Lowe's environment for other hammers and nails or whatever, I'll be picking up my gutters.
Okay, your covers, your screens.
Yeah. That's right. This is a cultural thing that is completely alien to me. I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
It's gutter talk.
I don't have.
Maybe you're better off that way.
Yeah, right. Probably. It sounds very stressful. But again, going back to internality, my only argument is that the dominant meaning of in philosophy of mind and in psychology implies internality. That doesn't deny the possibility of alternative interpretations of it. That's all I'm saying.
I think it wanders all over the block is the trouble. It's just one of those all-purpose, one of my friends used to call an all-purpose syntactical operator.
Right, yes. Well, for better or worse, I mean, I'm not defending the use of or even internality. But to me, again, as I said before, it's pretty straightforward, especially if you are a reductive materialist, which I am assuming that Max you disagree with. I'm talking about identity theorists like All in Place, and so if you are an identity, right, Smart and others, and again it hasn't been a very popular view in the philosophy of mind in general. But it hasn't disappeared either, and there are still identity theories.
I'm ambivalent. That's where I'm.
Oh, okay.
I used to be straightforward identity theorist, but owing to the problems that I expressed here, I can see why people don't want to buy that.
Yeah, especially the extensionality versus intentionality thing.
So
that's a problem.
Identification is not. Right. We don't understand that.
Right. But if you are an identity theorist, that is to say, someone who believes that all mental properties are brain properties. That's the basic thesis, the basic proposal of identity theories. Then every mental state, every mental process or event is necessarily internal, insofar as your brain is internal to you or to the mental subject. Usually, under normal conditions, this gets very complicated very fast.
Well, the little paper I mentioned earlier, if I may, which I anticipated Putnam was called a defense of materialism. Mm-hmm. And I made a distinction or used a distinction by Peirce between type and token identities.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Now, argued that the identity theory was more plausible, understood as a type rather
as a type. That's right.
Than a token.
I think that's the intention. There's that word again. The intention of of identity theorists, I think, that most identity theory is mostly a type identity.
Yeah, so if you have a thought of 2 + 2 is 4, and I have a thought of 2 + 2 is 4, they are not token identical, but type identical.
Type identical.
Nice exposition. Right. Yeah, I've got a question about identity theory. When I hear Max talk, I think of him as an embodied philosopher. you say, I hurt, not that I'm in pain, I hurt. So he really refers to himself as an organism and does not make these finer distinctions, which is where a lot of good psychology is going. So embodied cognition means, of course, that we don't think with our brain alone, we think with our body, our external peripheral nervous system as well as our central, and in fact, our hands come into play sometimes when we're thinking. They actually do facilitate certain kinds of thoughts.
Right, like adding 2 + 4. I could go like this. Well, 2 plus.
So would an identity theorist philosopher allow that as the other side of the equal sign when he says when we say that the mind and the brain are the same? Would he accept the extension of the brain to be the embodiment of it?
Well, this is like where I think where people go, as Dennett does, functionalist. Functionally speaking, they're the same. Physically speaking, maybe not.
Yeah. Okay.
It is not easy to distinguish functionalism from reductive materialism or the identity theory, because both are materialistic.
It's good to hear you say that.
Yeah, it's not easy to do it. I think I've managed to do it, but I'm not sure if it is correct or not.
I don't see them as mutually exclusive.
They are not mutually exclusive, but they are not the same either. They are different.
I agree.
They're different. My own take on it is that the functionalism, the multiple realizability thesis of functionalism I think is the key difference. That according to functionalism, at least in its traditional formulations, like Putnam's formulation, based on this multiple realizability thesis, is that the brain is just one possible physical realization of mental states, events, properties. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But there can be others. So the specific physical realization is not what defines the mental. What defines the mental is something different that could be physically realized.
Well, yes, I'm very much in favor of this. Remembering how to do something is there's muscle memory there.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's
just in the brain.
Right, exactly. Whereas the identity theorist, I think, rejects this multiple realizability thesis and proposes that the brain is the only possible physical realization of mental properties. That's my take on it. I'm not defending. I'm just trying to differentiate between the two.
Yes, but I felt when I made my point that whereas Jack Smart and Nolan Place, who were friends of mine, by the way, I got to know both men and admired them enormously, and thought, yes, the brain has got to be the center of the story, the hero of the story, but
the only hero.
But it doesn't. The identity they're talking about doesn't really have to be a token identity.
No, that's right.
Right?
It's still a type identity.
Behaviorism is I think has a functional identity. It's a form of functionalism, is it not?
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I'd not thought of it.
I'm not so sure about it. I think I still think it's a form of type identity, but the type is different there. The type is behavioral type, not brain type.
Well,
that's my take on it.
Yeah, okay.
So it's different. The type token distinction is another piece of philosophical.
I had it from Peirce. I wrote a dissertation on Peirce,
Wow. Yeah.
I learned my philosophy from Peirce.
I didn't know that.
Peirce,
Real philosophy. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Peirce. The type token distinction it comes from Peirce, of course. Which some pronounce as Pierce. I don't know if that's correct or not. I don't think it's correct.
It's from the Old English name Pers.
That's right. Yes.
and it's pronounced purse.
So the correct pronunciation is purse. That's right.
Yeah, people want to, but that's Pierce is another name altogether.
Which is Pierce. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
I
was introduced to Peirce by Jimmy Feebleman at Tulane. I wrote a master's thesis and then went ahead and went to Yale and wrote my dissertation on Peirce. That's how I finished in 3 years.
Wow. I found it hard. I found it hard to read Peirce. Is he difficult to read?
I don't think so. He seemed to me to be very natural to read.
3 years for a philosophy degree. I don't know. I think everybody should write a dissertation on Peirce if you can do it like that.
Yeah.
Well, I was 23 when I finished that, took that degree.
Wow.
I don't think I was ever that young.
I
don't remember. I don't remember being that young.
Okay, I want to get us back to, I've learned so much when I interact with you guys. You know so much. You have fine distinctions that I might master, but then I quickly forget or blend. And you tie them down to the pegs of names for the positions that organizes them for you. And I've never been able to do that. I will never play bridge with either of you guys, in part because I don't know how to play bridge. But anyhow, we started play everything else though.
Yes.
Started talking about whether we could talk. We can certainly talk about physiological changes with causal language, especially Ines kinds of language. And I did have a question for you that's probably best done in email, Jose, about exactly why they require insufficient but necessary,
yes,
or non-redundant, and conjoined with otherwise sufficient but not necessary. And I didn't understand why the last was not necessary, but let's not do that now.
Okay.
Let's instead get back and see if everyone agrees with what I take to be Max's position, that when we're talking using the S intentional about thoughts and mental states and so forth, we really cannot talk about causes because we don't have a well-defined thing to give that label to. Is that your position, Max?
Yes, roughly so, yes.
Okay.
That's it. You got to. We don't have the syntax ready.
Yeah.
For the languages, two different languages.
Your friend Wittgenstein said, what was it, Proposition 7, where we cannot speak, we should remain silent.
That's the old Wittgenstein.
Yeah, it's the old. Yeah,
that's the first one.
Yeah. Senior, Wittgenstein Senior.
Right.
But so that means there are a lot of things like the internal processes of the sun that we can hypothesize about, but we can't really, we can make hypotheses, but we really shouldn't talk in causal terms about the thermonuclear reactions going on because, or at least 100 years ago, we couldn't because we really didn't understand them well. Is that true?
Well, as a general rule, I don't think we should be talking about things we don't understand,
Yeah.
Except to wonder.
It seems to me that's how we come to understand them, though.
Well, that of course is true.
Yes.
But then we don't know what we're talking about. That's the difficulty with that. We're seeking to find out what we're talking about.
Yeah, well said. You always say things precisely so. Yeah.
Yes. Well, again, I take I mean, if perhaps a big if internalism, if there is such a thing as internalism in the philosophy of mind and in psychology in general, which is the thesis that mental states, events, and processes are inside a subject. If there is such a thing, which I think there is, then I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if internality is refers to something that is inside the subject, some subject, an animal, for example, then it's pretty straightforward. I mean, that is a physical relationship. I mean, there is no other way around. But I still have to think about, you know, whether internalism is a thing. Really, I think it is. And in fact, if we go back to Wittgenstein's beetle in a box metaphor or thought experiment, I think it's pretty clear that by in he means internal, to inside the box, and that thing inside the box has to be physical.
Isn't it the case that the force of the metaphor comes from it being unobservable, not necessarily?
I think, but why is it unobservable? Because it's inside. You cannot see it because it's inside a box.
Let me suggest that Wittgenstein was speaking in oratio obliqua. Indirect discourse.
I was 24 before I tried that.
And with the intent of reducing the speech that he was using to absurdity.
Oh,
okay. So you're saying that he was trying to
explode the notion of inner thoughts being inner in any clear.
Oh, okay.
sense.
Yes. Right. Okay. Yes. Of course. Yes. I agree with that. Yes, I agree with that.
And I take it that's what Ryle wanted to do too. That's with their behaviorism.
Right. Okay. Yes. I agree with that. Yes. But would you agree that all brain processes, events, and states, under normal circumstances, are inside an animal?
Well, of course.
Okay.
They're in your head.
But not necessarily.
We agree on something.
Not necessarily all thoughtful processes, because as Max said, we have muscle memory and so forth.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, I think
I agree with that.
I have long thought that I think with my typewriter.
Yeah.
I think by writing.
Yes.
It's part of the process.
Yes. Well,
I know what I think when I've seen it, what I have written, or
That's
say,
right.
"Oh shit, that isn't what I'm."
Right.
No.
Well, there is the extend. There is Alan Chalmers extended, or David Chalmers, I should say. David Chalmers extended cognition proposal, which takes certain external things, but again, the external internal distinction there plays, I think, a central role.
Well, Bill Bechtel has written very well.
And Bechtel too. That's right. Yes, that's Chalmers and Bechtel's extended cognition hypothesis or theory, according to which certain external things to you are constitutive of your mind, but they don't deny constitutive.
Are they constitutive or participatory?
Constitutive, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say yes. So, for example, when you use your iPhone or your smartphone to navigate, a map to Waze, for example, which I use a lot because I'm a terribly disoriented person. My navigational skills are awful, and I absolutely need that. So according to this extended cognition theory, that Waze is part of my cognition, literally is constitutive part, not just participatory, but constitutive. That's my understanding of it. But again, I might be wrong. Always add that I might be wrong to everything I say. I don't know if Max agrees with this interpretation.
I do indeed agree. You might be wrong in everything you say, but
likewise. Right back at you.
But I admit having made a mistake once.
Once that's right. But I don't know if that's your reading of this extended cognition theory.
I've heard the term, but that's about all. So I really don't know.
I could send you the seminal, the original I think it's Chalmers and Bechtel. If I'm not sure about the second author, but they where they for the first time they present this and see if you agree with. But again, going back to our discussion to our topic, the internal external distinction there plays a central role, and I think it's still well. It's a very useful distinction for some things, for certain things, but I don't think it's indispensable. Let's put it that way. I think
is it not possible to hear them?
I think we can abandon that distinction together with the observable and unobservable distinction. I think
is it not possible to read them as saying that, as Skinner once said, the skin does not make that much of a difference? It's not that they are reasserting internal external as so much as denying the importance of making the distinction when it comes to cognition.
Right. Yes. I would say that. I would agree with that. But the internal external distinction is not mysterious. It's nothing mysterious. It can be useful under certain circumstances in certain cases. But I think it's dispensable.
It
theoretically.
can also be a barrier, as Skinner wanted to, right?
That's right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I'm not talking about only the arbitrariness of the limit of the frontier that separates the internal, but it is a very, very commonly used distinction in biology, and without getting into the mind or anything like that. The concept, for example, the concept of a cell membrane is crucial,
of course,
in anatomy, in cellular biology. The notion of a cell membrane and the notion of the inside versus the outside of a cell, and it is a crucial distinction also in the in descriptions, mathematical descriptions, I think, of resting potential and action potentials in neurons, for example, going back to to the brain. But it's largely arbitrary. For example, the concept of the voltage is defined in terms of what happens inside versus is a difference of as a potential, right? It's a difference of potential. It's a difference of charge, right, between two sides of a barrier. Now, which one is inside or outside is arbitrary, it's irrelevant, but there is a distinction there between two sides of a barrier. I think that's the concept of voltage, right, Peter? Will you agree with that?
Yeah, there's always got to be a gradient to have a voltage.
It's a difference of charge, but between two sides. But in a battery, for example, the difference is between the two poles, right? And to measure the voltage, you have to put your two electrodes in two sides, right? But both are external, if you think about it, in the battery, right? At least the way you measure it, which is interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. But in neurons, you have the electrode that you put inside the cell and the electrode that you put outside the cell, and you measure the difference, the difference of charge.
Well, you're arguing that boundaries are real and are important, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
Okay, good.
No.
But that doesn't mean that that we absolutely need the internal-external distinction.
Shall we leave it at that for today?
Yes, we could. Yes, absolutely. And I would love to meet again with you guys, but again, if you're willing to, and if you want to, I'm open to.
In email or in person, and I love your faces. I love also, Jose, what your computer does with your beard. Sometimes it pulls.
I'm phasing. I'm phasing out.
Pulls it out and makes it huge, and sometimes it conjoins you with your fingers.
That's right. That's a problem. I don't have a green screen behind me. That would help a lot, but I don't have it.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, you're a very complicated person, you see.
Yes. Sometimes too complicated.
So, Jose,
for my own good.
I want you to send two things: the Bechtel Chalmers reference for the externalist philosophy, or whatever you called it, and then a clarification.
Extended cognition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think what they propose is that the mind